Good evening. We'd like to get started with our lecture this evening. My name is Father Larry Snyder. I'm the Vice President for Mission here at the University of St. Thomas. We're delighted that you can be here for this fourth in a series of lectures on Archbishop Ireland. We're very honored to have our esteemed guests tonight, as well as to have Archbishop Hebda and Bishop Cousins. I'm just going to give you a logistic, and that is you should have gotten a white card on the way in. And those are for questions. If you think of a question as Cardinal Dolan is speaking, please write it on there. And if you hold it up, one of these seminarians who are helping will come and get that so that we then can present them to the Cardinal after his lecture. So with that, I'm going to ask the President Emeritus Dennis Deese to come forward. Father Deese.
Well, good evening and welcome to the University of St. Thomas. My name is Dennis Deese, and my role tonight is one of greeting, a greeter. I'm a greeter this evening. Your official greeter. People actually tell me that Walmart employees get this job at my age, and so it goes, but we're very happy you're here, and I want to welcome you on behalf of Dr. Julie Sullivan, who would have been here this evening, but for a death in the family, and so please remember her family in your prayers. Tonight's speaker will be will offer the final lecture in the John Ireland Centennial year, the year honoring the death of our founder in 1918. And as you know, aside from founding the University of St. Thomas, he was also a great visionary and a powerful player on the national stage, larger than life. And we're very honored to have one of his successors here this evening, the 12th Bishop of St. Paul and Minneapolis, who will introduce our distinguished speaker, Archbishop Bernard Hebda.
Thank you, Father Deese. It's an honor to be here this evening and to share with you my joy that Cardinal Dolan has agreed to offer this lecture this evening. He's not only an incredible archbishop, very much in the mold of John Ireland, but he is one of the finest historians of the American Catholic Church. He studied under John Tracy Ellis at Catholic University, and you can only be with him for a few minutes when you begin to recognize that he has such an incredible mind for history. And he's able to make so many connections. And I'm sure that we'll be hearing some of that this evening. He, not only was he a very fine church historian, but he's really a great churchman as well. He's a priest of the Archdiocese of St. Louis. He served in the nunciature in Washington, D.C. He was the rector of my alma mater, the North American College, where he just brought great growth and great vision. He only made one mistake while he was the rector, is that he hired me to be an adjunct spiritual director. But for me, it was a great blessing because I was able then to participate in the life of the seminary and got to hear the rectors' conferences that eventually became the book Priests for the Third Millennium. And so as I read that book, which I often do, I plagiarize a little bit, Your Eminence, but I can hear His Eminence's voice for sure as I read those words. But he has such a clear vision of priesthood and indeed of how it is that the church can respond to the challenges of the modern day. It wasn't a surprise to any of us when he was named to be the auxiliary bishop in St. Louis, or when he became the Archbishop of Milwaukee, or indeed when he went to the Archdiocese of New York. It wasn't surprising either that the Holy Father, Pope Benedict, would have recognized him as such a superb archbishop that he needed to be a cardinal. And so he wears that red hat with distinction. But he continues to serve not only the Church of New York with such generosity, but he really, as the Archbishop of New York, ends up being a pastor for all of the United States because of the media that are all in New York. And so we often listen for the words, for the compassion, for the insights that Cardinal Dolan offers. And for that, we are most grateful. Delighted to have the opportunity to have His Eminence speak to us this evening on John Ireland. In the time that I've been in the Archdiocese, I've been trying to learn more and more about this great figure who has the connection between not only between the university and the Archdiocese for sure. As is the case with Cardinal Dolan, he had a much broader vision as well for the Church. I hope that we'll hear some of that about that this evening as well. Without further ado, Cardinal, I would welcome you to the podium. Thank you for being here.
Very gracious.
Thanks.
Welcome. I appreciate it. Archbishop Hebda, thank you for that gracious introduction. You were saying such kind things about me. You could have gone on forever, which I understand you often do. But oh, listen, Archbishop Hebda, Bishop Cousins, thanks. What a joy and a privilege to be here at this acclaimed St. Thomas University as you conclude what I understand to have been a pretty successful celebration of the centennial of the Transitus, the passing, the death of Archbishop John Ireland, the colorful founder of this great university. So to be with my good friends, Archbishop Hebda, to be here with Bishop Cousins, and to be here in this archdiocese when you all are mourning another man who means a lot to me, Archbishop Harry Flynn. Those of you who were at Mass earlier this evening might remember that I offered my Mass intention this evening was for him. To be back on this campus were two loves of my life, my two nieces, Erin and Caitlin. They call this their alma mater with a lot of gratitude and pride and love. They are so devoted to the Catholic Studies program. That's why I'm glad that Dr. Naughton is here this evening. By the way, Erin just had her second baby last night, Anne Marie Kelly, which I'm very happy about. So to reconnect with good friends at the esteemed St. Paul Seminary and St. John Vianney Seminary, as well as priests and people here within the Archdiocese, and speak at a university where four of the heroes in my priestly life were educated. Those four heroes would be Monsignor John A. Ryan. I understand you just had a lecture on him a little while ago. Monsignor William Kirby, Edwin V. O'Hara, whose life I wrote as my doctoral dissertation, and Fulton J. Sheen, four alumni of the St. Paul Seminary and of this great university. To be here on this campus really means a lot to me. And to be honest with you, to be here this evening to do a corporal work of mercy, to offer consolation and condolences to you in anticipation of your defeat by the mighty Yankees. That'll be coming up very soon. I was doing so well anyway. And listen, to be out of the city of New York, especially during this annual mess that we call UN Week, anyway, you get the impression. I'm happy to be here. I want to thank you for one other thing. It is really good to be able to speak about a topic in American Catholic history. That's my field. When I was a priest for 3 years, a priest in the Archdiocese of St. Louis, as Archbishop Hebda mentioned in his gracious introduction, after 3 years, my Archbishop sent me away for graduate work to the Catholic University of America, which, by the way, John Ireland could be considered a co-founder of, as well as the founder of this one, to study the history of the Catholic Church in the United States. And I was able to stay there to take my doctorate. Now, the presumption at the time, my own Archbishop and certainly myself, would be that, hey, I guess my priesthood will be spent teaching and researching and writing in American Catholic history. And I was kind of looking forward to that. And no choice of my own, as most of us don't have a choice in this. That didn't work out. Yeah, I've done some teaching. I've been able to do some writing and research in American Catholic history. But an occasion like this gets me back into things. And for that, I am very grateful. I'm back. And I'm enjoying it already very much, especially the chance to speak of one of the most towering, influential characters in American Catholic history. Now, as you see, I've entitled my lecture this evening, John Ireland, Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. Now, when I chose that title, I thought, I don't know if this is too appropriate, because that obviously is the title that St. Paul gave to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So I thought, should I do that? But look, I'm consoled, and I don't mind, because John Ireland had a lot of virtues. Humility was not one of them. And I think that he would readily agree that he deserved to have a title to a lecture on him, words that were applied to our Lord himself. So my strategy this evening, folks, for the 40 minutes or so that have been allotted to me, is that I'm going to spend most of my time on the yesterday, since this is, after all, a history lecture. And then I'll see if any of the yesterday of John Ireland can illuminate the challenges of today and tomorrow. And you won't be surprised to find out that I sure do think that we can learn a lot from John Ireland for today and tomorrow. So let's start, what do you say, with the yesterday? Let me sketch for a little while the biography of the one called the Consecrated Blizzard of the Northwest, John Ireland, that term, the Consecrated Blizzard of the Northwest, his non-admirers, and their name was legion, especially on the coast that I now call home, that's the name that they applied to him. John Ireland was, surprise, surprise, born in Ireland, County Kilkenny to be exact, in 1838. His folks fled the greatest peacetime disaster in human history, the potato famine of Ireland, coming with their 6 kids a decade after his birth in 1848. They landed first in Chicago, and after a short time, who can blame them, moved from Chicago here to St. Paul. And here they landed in 1852. Now, only a year later, young John Ireland approached the bishop then, John Cretin. Is that how you pronounce it, Archbishop? Cretin? Okay. John Cretin, young John Ireland, heck, he was only 15 at the time. He approached Bishop Cretin with an interest in a priestly vocation. And the bishop did a little research and found out that this was an extraordinarily energetic, intelligent, devoted, faithful young man of a beautiful family just arrived of immigrants. And he said, I accept you to begin your preparation for the priesthood. And he not only did that, but he sent him to France to study to be a priest. Bishop Cretin, as you might imagine from his name, was French. And he sent young John Ireland to his own alma mater in Bely in France. There, John Ireland, can you believe it, 15 years of age, already to leave home and go to France, he excelled, especially radiant in oratory and in French. He would be flawless in speaking French from then on. And after 4 years there, everybody, in the college seminary, he then was appointed by Bishop Cretin to the Marist Major Seminary at Mount Bell. So he would return home in 1861. Then he would be ordained by the man who took Bishop Cretin's place, Bishop Thomas Grace. He was only a priest a couple months when the bishop appointed him to be a chaplain in the Civil War. And he exhibited John Ireland. He was only young Father Ireland was only a chaplain for 2 years, but he exhibited uncommon valor. And he also served zealously the spiritual needs of the 5th Minnesota Infantry with distinction. This experience, everybody, would really be searing for him as he saw a lot of suffering, and he was able to tend to the dying. And it explains some of the intense patriotism, his love for the United States, that would color his later life. It would also, he would become, remember, he was an Irish immigrant, okay? But he fell in love deeply with the United States and became an ardent patriot devoted to the cause of the Union, the United States of America. He returned home and began work at the St. Paul Cathedral, not the one you know now, not the one which he ended up building and dedicating in 1915, but to one of the early ones. Archbishop Hebda says there were 4 different sites of what you call the first St. Paul Cathedral, and he was assigned as pastor there until 1869, when Bishop Grace, who had taken a liking to him, said, I want you to accompany me as my peritus. Do you know what that word means? Expert. As my peritus at the First Vatican Council, 1869 to 1870 in Rome. Off John Ireland went. And he began to be widely known and respected. He spoke French. He picked up some Italian. He was erudite. He was as gregarious as they came. And he picked up a lot of attention, so much so that when he returned home, he had come to apparently some attention of some rather influential people, because he and Bishop Grace found out that he was to be appointed a bishop in Nebraska. And Archbishop Father Ireland at the time was so deeply in love with St. Paul that he didn't want to go to Nebraska. And in addition, perhaps some of you can understand that, I don't know. In addition to his oratory and his pastoral energy and his organizational skills, especially, by the way, gaining a lot of fame in what's called colonization. He was an early organizer of bringing impoverished immigrants, mostly Irish, from the East Coast, where they were trapped in slums, and settling them in the lush farming areas of Minnesota. So he gained he had gained a claim in that, his erudition, speaking French, going to the First Vatican Council. He quickly gained added reputation as rather bold and fearless when he and Bishop Grace wrote Pio IX, Pope Pius IX, and said, Holy Father, please don't make me go to Nebraska. And Bishop Grace said, I would much rather you would appoint John Ireland as my coadjutor bishop. You know what that means? The auxiliary bishop who will automatically take over. All right? So sure enough, in 1875, Pope Pius IX changed his mind, which didn't happen very often, if you know anything about Pius IX, and revoked the appointment to Nebraska, and instead nominated the 37-year-old Ireland as coadjutor bishop to Grace in 1875. Bishop Grace's fragile health led to his own resignation in 1884, and our man then took over. One of his first acts in 1885 was to found this prestigious college. And 9 years later, the St. Paul Seminary, both reliant upon the largesse of a man named Jim Hill. Oh, I know Jim Hill. He's a good friend of mine. He was also a good friend of John Ireland, and John Ireland didn't mind picking his pocket. He was the great railroad magnate, and John Ireland relied upon his generosity in all of his endeavors. And folks, they were massive, because he began to expand parishes, schools, charitable institutions, healthcare institutions, new all kinds of pastoral initiatives. And this diocese became an archdiocese in 1888, and John Ireland became the first archbishop of St. Paul. He presided over its vast expansion. that cost him. If you read the masterful biography of John Ireland, you will see that one of the curses on an otherwise rather brilliant career was that he was always in deep money problems. He never had enough money, and the archdiocese was always in the red. Now, if you speak about the red, another flaw that poor Archbishop Ireland was, he had a different version of being in the red. Namely, he longed to be named a cardinal. And the rumors were very frequent because it was thought that the Holy See, Rome, would want to kind of give a sign of solicitude to the growing, burgeoning church in the West. Here we are in St. Paul, and to have a cardinal there, but it never happened. And it was kind of a cross for John Ireland, who really longed for that. In fact, in his final years, when he was afflicted with what we'd now call dementia, he would constantly be muttering for le chapeau, the hat. He would always be talking about, is the hat arriving? Is the chapeau going to arrive? The last 2 decades of his extraordinarily active life saw national and international attention as he often traveled to France as a delegate of the American government, for instance, in 1900, to receive the coveted Cross of the Legion of Honor. He was asked by President McKinley to be a referee diplomatically to try to avert the horrors of the Spanish-American War. And President Teddy Roosevelt asked him to help negotiate extraordinarily delicate land claims in the Philippines. So he had a lot of national and international responsibilities as well. This energetic life came to an end 101 years ago yesterday, when on September 25th, 1918, John Ireland went to the Lord, I trust. All right, enough of the yesterday, the bio. What I'd like to drive home now, everybody, is that John Ireland was one of the most visible, outspoken, indefatigable bishops during the 2 decades, 1880 to 1900, that have to be the most controversial, colorful, and contentious years in the American Catholic drama. You think we got tensions and controversies today? This is Disneyland compared to what was going on in the Catholic Church in the United States between the years 1880 and 1900. Why? Number of reasons, everybody. For one, the Catholic Church in the United States was growing thanks to immigration. By the time the early 1880s came, guess what? The Catholic population in the United States was the largest single religious denomination because of the immigrants. Secondly, the immigrants were getting settled. All right, so they were beginning to take their place in American society. The structure, the infrastructure of the church was in place. Parishes, schools, hospitals, Catholic charities, social work. This was all kind of all the building projects that would continue to be a challenge to John Ireland. At least the foundation was in place and they had a structure. Thirdly, there was a pope after 1878, from 1878 to 1903, Leo XIII, who had an intense interest in the Catholic Church in the United States. He admitted he didn't quite understand it. He kind of set as the goal of his pontificate to kind of bring the church a bit more in contact with the world. It had been somewhat in a circle the wagon posture after the French Revolution, and that was especially formalized during the 32-year reign of Pope Pius IX. Leo XIII kind of said, we've got to get out of the bunker and begin to get back into the evangelizing the world. And he kind of looked to the United States as a possible laboratory where that was happening. So all of a sudden, the tiny, threatened minority Catholic population in the United States found itself growing, settled, and somewhat captivating the attention of the Church Universal. These years would see the bishops of the United States, and yes, priests and religious women and lay leaders, divided over the direction that the church in the United States needed to take. And as you listen to them, it will dawn on you that that kind of contention and controversy is still with us. So listen to how Ireland handled it, and then think later if some of those insights could apply today. Now, I apologize for being overly simplified here, but here are the two camps that seem to characterize. I'm talking about the bishops, but again, they characterized others. The two camps were divided over a pivotal question. How should the Catholic Church in the United States of America, now larger and getting settled, how should that church adapt itself to this new environment called America? You would know that the Catholic Church was looked upon with suspicion, if not downright antagonism. And Catholics felt, along with Jews, as classic outsiders. That was beginning to change in the 1880s. And our bishops began to say, how can we better fit in? How should we assimilate? How should we accommodate into American life? Without losing the essentials of our faith, how can we be accepted as trustworthy, respected, active, patriotic American neighbors, all right? So there'd be two answers to that, and the two were at loggerheads. Group one would be called the conservatives, all right? Group one would be called the conservatives. These would be mostly bishops of German lineage. They would be led by German bishops, such as those down the highway there, the two archbishops of Milwaukee, Heiss and Kotzer. They would also be led by an Irishman, Michael Augustine Corrigan, who was one of my predecessors as Archbishop of New York, and they would be highly supported by the Jesuits. The Jesuits would have been on the conservative side. So sometimes history isn't more the same, all right? Sometimes there are great differences. Now, this conservative wing would hold to the following tenets. Listen closely as to how Catholics in the United States should or should not assimilate to their new home. Here's their first point. The conservatives would say there is an inbuilt tension between American culture and Catholic culture. We Catholics now in the United States, yes, we're grateful, yes, we're happy, yes, we're patriotic, but we need to protect our own unique religious values from the contrary ones that are rampant in this new home of ours, the United States of America. The values of the church and the values of America, they would say, are at odds. They would say, look out. Beware of American causes, these reform movements, because they're all at odds with our faith. They would prefer to call themselves a Catholic American than an American Catholic, all right? Here's the second characteristic of the conservatives. Catholics should embrace what makes us distinct and a different community in America. We shouldn't try to be like everybody else. That would especially exemplify itself in Catholic schools. So do we need our own schools, or should we join the public ones? Would become a burning issue, as I'll talk about in a minute. Number three, they would say our faith and our ethnic identity are allied. We got to keep our language. We got to keep our customs. We got to keep our clubs, societies, and organizations. And by the way, it would be a heck of a lot better if we had our own parishes, all right? The Germans especially would say that. And finally, the conservatives would say Rome, the Vatican, the Holy See, should be strict with Catholics in the United States, warning them about the dangers that are inherent in a contrary American culture. Makes sense? That would be the conservative branch. Now, the other group would be called the Americanizers, sometimes the Americanists, sometimes the liberals, all right? What would they think of Catholics being at home in America? Well, here's what they think. Yippee! This is great. Catholics can enthusiastically embrace this new home because it is friendly to Catholic values. We need to be on the side of progress, of science, of learning, of enlightened approach to things, democracy, and social reform. They would say, number two, in non-essentials, because we're not talking about the divinity of Christ, the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. Both sides agreed on the essentials of the faith, but in the non-essentials, we need to emphasize what makes us loyal Americans, not at odds with American culture. That means we need to be patriotic, we need to be ecumenically sensitive, we need to be respectful of the public schools, we need to kind of be involved in the society and culture in which we live. In the famous phrase of your founder, church and age unite. Church and age unite. Number three, we got to de-emphasize our ethnic roots. Put the old costumes in the closet. Get rid of the garlic and olive oil, okay? Leave your ethnic identity behind. Learn English and dump the language. The church should be an agent of Americanization. We don't need hyphenated Americans. We don't need Italo-Americans, Polish Americans, German Americans, Irish Americans. We need Americans, all right? So leave your ethnic identity besides. And by the way, the Holy See, Rome, should mind its own business and stay out of our affairs because they don't understand what's going on in the United States anyway. So leave us alone, all right? Now, who would be on this side? Well, I'll tell you who would be on this Americanist side. The mostly Irish bishops, John Cain, who was the Archbishop of Dubuque and the first president of the Catholic University of America, which was sort of the center of the Americanist party. John Lancaster Spalding, who was the Bishop of Peoria, probably the intellectual spark plug for the Americanizers. The Paulist Fathers, founded by Isaac Hecker, the Catholic University of America, and towering above all, Big John, Big Bad John, all right? John Ireland, the leader of the Americanists, the leaders of the Americanizers. By the way, the most prominent bishop of the time was not John Ireland. He was certainly well known, but the most prominent bishop of the time would have been James Cardinal Gibbons, who was the Archbishop of Baltimore, and he and John Ireland were very good friends. James Gibbons was a supporter of the Americanists, but he would tend to take a more conciliatory bridge building between the two. Being conciliatory in bridge buildings would not have been one of John Ireland's temperaments. It was Gibbons, all right? Keep in mind, everybody, the basic questions were not about Catholic faith and morals. The basic questions were about what we call accommodation. How do we Catholics accommodate our faith to the new home in which we live? The Americanizers, again, would say, we can mostly agree with what's going on in America. We should accommodate when we can and as much as we can. The conservatives would say, resist becoming like everybody else. Preserve a distinctive, identifiable Catholic culture. They love to quote the prophets who told the people of Israel who were in exile in Babylon, don't be at home in Babylon, all right? So resist, preserve your Catholic culture. Now, I could give you a dozen examples of topics, of themes, of events where you would see these two at the 50-yard line, ready to do battle. I could talk about temperance. You know what temperance is, right? The temperance movement in the United States after the Civil War and coming to a head in the 1880s, 1890s, coming to a head in Prohibition, outlawing the sale of intoxicating liquor, was an extraordinarily progressive, enlightened American cause. The Americanizers were temperance advocates. John Ireland was a roaring teetotaler, all right? He would not allow any drink at all. He would not ordain a man who drank. He would not allow drink at Catholic facilities because the Americanizers wanted temperance. This was a prominent American cause. If you're going to be a respectable American and accepted and assimilate into society and be accommodated, you can't drink. And he didn't like the canard and the caricature, especially of the Irish, as drunks. And he said, we got to get rid of that. We got to clean up our act if we're going to be accepted and respected in American society. So the Americanizers were strong temperance advocates. The conservatives said, just because you Irish can't hold your beer doesn't mean the rest of us can't drink. And keep your customs to yourself. Beer and dance and song happen to be quite a bit of our German culture, our Polish culture. So this is another example of you Americanizers thinking of these flash in the pan, enlightened, progressive American causes that we in the church ought to jump on the bandwagon, forget about it. Catholic University of America would be another one. When the bishops met at Baltimore for the Third Plenary Council in 1884, they established the Catholic University of America. It was approved by Pope Leo XIII in 1887. Is that a martini you're bringing me? Oh, good. After the temperance, there. Talking about the powerful thirst. Thank you. So I felt guilty having a beer at dinner tonight in the fine dinner that we had. Here I am talking about John Ireland, and I had a drink. He would not be amused. But Catholic University became an Americanizer's dream, and one of the pivotal figures in its establishment was John Ireland. If we're going to be accepted in this culture, at the heart of America, in our nation's capital, we need a respected university. Okay? The conservatives would, of course, since the Jesuits were on the conservative side, they said, we happen to have one, it's called Georgetown, all right? So we don't need to found another one. And mind your own business, stay at home. We don't need all this national Catholicism. Kind of let us alone in our parishes and dioceses and forget that. Priest by the name of Edward McGlynn, you ever heard him? This was another flashpoint between the two groups. A priest in the Archdiocese of New York who was very much at odds with his Archbishop, Michael Corrigan, which made him a friend of John Ireland, okay? If you're the enemy of my enemy is my friend. He supported a very controversial candidate for mayor in the mid-1880s by the name of Henry George, who was sort of the Bernie Sanders of his day. And Corrigan was not amused, and he excommunicated him. And John Ireland would go to Rome to fight for Edward McGlynn to be reinstated, which eventually he was. And something called, I'm just giving you some examples here, and then I'm going to go into 2 or 3 of them in a little bit more seriousness. Something called Kehensleism. You ever heard of that? A very pious German Catholic by the name of Peter Paul Kehenslee. And he founded something called the Raphael Verein, named after St. Raphael, to help German immigrants to the United States. And he was convinced that the German immigrants were losing the faith because the Irish bishops were ignoring them and insulting them. And he was very worried. Anytime, it's a constant in American Catholic history, everybody, that we're always worried about what we call leakage. The immigrants losing the faith. We are today, right? Yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We're worried about the Latinos losing their Catholic identity. Well, Kehenslee got very close to Pope Leo. And Kehenslee proposed to Pope Leo that in the United States, first of all, it would be very good to appoint many more German bishops instead of those of Irish background. And secondly, we should have separate dioceses in the United States for each ethnic group. So there wouldn't be an Archdiocese of St. Paul. There'd be an Archdiocese for German American Catholics. There would be an Archdiocese for Irish American Catholics. And parishes as well, okay? Well, as you might imagine, that sent chills up and down the spine of the Americanizers, and they fought it, and by the way, they won. So there's some issues that kind of were sparking this debate this contention between the two groups, the conservatives and the Americanizers. Can I look a little bit more? How are we doing time-wise, Archbishop? I think I got another 15 minutes. Can I look a little more intensely at 2 or 3 issues that where it really exploded? Okay. One would be in something called the Knights of Labor. Now, if you're going to understand the controversy between the conservatives and the Americanists over the Knights of Labor, you have to understand the Catholic fear of something called secret societies. The Catholic Church was very scared of and opposed to secret societies, especially in Europe, where secret societies were usually set up to oppose the church. The granddaddy of them all would have been the Masons, okay? The Masons would be a dreaded secret society. So the church was opposed and would not allow Catholics to join secret societies. That's why Catholics in the United States, they couldn't join the Masons, so they formed their own secret society called the Knights of Columbus, okay? So, which was acceptable. So, but here's the trouble in the United States, everybody. For one, secret societies are amazingly popular. I'm going to go after the lecture tonight to fly home to see my dear mom in Washington, Missouri. When I'm driving to her house, I will pass, and this is 2019, the Knights of Pythias, the Oddfellows, the Elks Lodge. These are all secret societies that are still amazingly popular, okay? They're very popular in America. Number 2, they weren't as anti-church as they were in Europe. And number 3, they were very needed for fraternal aid. In a time when there was no insurance, there was a value to be a member of a secret society, because if something happened on the job, your wife and kids were at least going to get some benefits, okay? So you see the tension here. Conservatives say, we can't join secret societies. This is another toxic oil spill of American culture. The conservatives, the Americanists say, oh, come on now. They're not as bad as they are in Europe. Our people need them. They're going to help them. We gotta let them join. And if we don't, we're going to lose our people. We got to be accepted in American society. Now, it came to a head with the Knights of Labor. The Knights of Labor were a secret society formed in Pennsylvania, which by the 1880s became very popular, and it was an early version of the Union movement. When you study American history here at the university, you'll come across the Knights of Labor because it would have been one of the first examples of organized labor. It was heavily Catholic. It was led by an extraordinarily fervent Catholic by the name of Terence Powderly, and it provided benefits to the widows and children of the men if something happened to them. The conservatives would say they can't join. It's secret. They were condemned in Canada, by the way. The Holy See, Rome, condemned the Knights of Labor in Canada. They say, so we can't let our people join. And the Americanists said, come on now, we're going to lose them. We have got to let up. We've got to accommodate. Well, in 1886, the archbishops of the country began to meet annually in 1885. Up till then, they had the plenary councils every 8 or 10 years. But in 1886, the archbishops met and said, what are we going to do about these Knights of Labor? Well, conservatives and Americanists battle, and they could not come to a decision. So our man, John Ireland, said to James Gibbons, we have got to go to Rome because there's a good chance that the conservatives are going to win, and Rome is going to say Catholics cannot join the Knights of Labor. So they went to Rome, and they stayed up late in what was called the Red Room of the original North American College in Rome on the Via dell'Umiltà. And John Ireland and Dennis J. O'Connell, who was the rector of the college, more or less wrote what came to be known as the memorial to Pope Leo and said, Holy Father, please don't condemn the Knights of Labor. If you do, we're going to lose the working men of the United States and their families. It's not a secret society. You got every right to be afraid of secret societies in Europe, but all the secret societies do in America is dress up funny and get drunk and have parades. So you don't have to be afraid of them. They're really not anti-church. And darn it, they're serving a good cause, because labor is an issue that the church needs to defend. Now, remember, they're talking to Pope Leo, who a couple years after this would write Rerum Novarum, which was the first of what are called the great social justice encyclicals of the magisterium. And so they put it in, and sure enough, they won. They won the day. The Knights of Labor were not condemned, all right? But do you see there the distinction, the difference? And do you see where your founder, John Ireland, came in on? First of all, he had an amazing solicitude for the turmoil and the tensions of working men and women in the United States. And secondly, his bias was in favor of trusting kind of the drift and the movement of American culture, and that Americans should fit into things like other Americans, what other Americans were doing. Let me give you another example. Catholic schools. Catholic schools. This would be a biggie, no surprise. To this day, every tension in American culture usually finds its way to the classroom, okay? And every tension in the church finds its way to campuses of universities and our Catholic schools. Catholic schools, as you know, were not with us from the beginning. It's true, there were great Catholic schools, but few. You think of Elizabeth Ann Seton, you think of Georgetown in 1789. You think of St. John Neumann. They really began to pick up with my predecessor, John Hughes, Dagger John Hughes, in the 1840s, the Archbishop of New York. In the 1840s, when he did, well, there weren't public schools either, for that matter. There weren't state-run schools. But in the 1840s, they began to develop, and there was something in New York called the common schools, which would be an early advance of the public schools, which got common money from the city and the state government, and to which all the kids were supposed to enroll. John Ireland, in the 1840s, he was literally getting thousands of immigrants daily on the docks of New York, and he had teeming tenements filled with Catholic kids who were supposed to go to these common schools, and he said, I can't let them go there. They hate the church. They're teaching anti-Catholic bigotry. They have to read the King James Bible, and they're taught the Protestant religion. He said, let's be friends here. Give me some share of the common fund, and I'll build my own schools. Well, they wouldn't hear of it, okay? So he started his own. And he also had a law passed that religion could not be taught in the common schools. So in a way, the Archbishop of New York was the founder of the godless public school system, all right? Because he said, if my kids can't have their religion, no kids get their religion in a public school. It is religion-free. So the Catholic schools began to mushroom, New York, Philadelphia, all up and down the East Coast through the Midwest, and they became amazingly popular. Could Catholic parents send their kids to public schools? In the 1870s, Rome said, well, if there's no Catholic schools available, you can, but you shouldn't. And in 1884, at the Third Plenary Council of Baltimore, the Archbishop said every parish has to have a Catholic school, and every parent must send their children to a Catholic school. That was a dream. That was a goal that was never reached. Okay, you can remember that. The high point of the Catholic school system in number of students would be 1965, and even then, only 64% of Catholic children in the United States were in our schools. That was the high point, so it never got all of them. So here we got these developing Catholic schools, and you've got the two sides again at odds. The conservatives said, we have to take Rome seriously. We have to insist our kids go there. We cannot allow them to go to the public schools. The public schools are diabolical. They're secular. They're godless. We have to protect the faith and the values of our kids. We insist on Catholic schools. The Americanizers, it wasn't that they were opposed to Catholic schools. Some were. Orestes Brownson, the great intellectual convert to Catholicism who's buried on the campus of Notre Dame, the great constitutional philosopher. He was against them. Father McGlynn, my old buddy in New York, who was an ultra-liberal, he was opposed to them. Most of the Americanists said Catholic schools are a good thing, and we should do our best to have them. But sooner or later, we got to make our peace with the public schools. And sooner or later, we got to admit that most of our kids are going to be going there. And sooner or later, we got to say, it's all right if you do. And by the way, it might not be a bad thing, because we keep our Catholic schools, and it just reminds the rest of the culture that we're different. We're at odds. We're a cult. We got our own stuff. We don't trust your schools. We're not real, pure Americans. So the Americanizers might support the Catholic schools. Let's just say they were less than exuberant. Now, so you got a fire burning in an argument about Catholic schools in around 1890, and as was his wont, John Ireland poured kerosene on the fire, all right? And in 1890, in this fair town of St. Paul, the National Education Association met. You know what the NEA is, all right? It's the Public School Teachers Society. And who did they ask to speak to them but John Ireland? The very fact that the Archbishop of St. Paul accepted that invitation from the largest public school advocacy group raised eyebrows around the United States, particularly among the conservatives. Not only that, he praised the public schools. He said public schools are the greatest thing America has, and he used one of his dramatic oratorical devices. He said, "Withered be the hand raised up against the public schools." It was called the "Withered be the hand" speech. Then he did admit, he said, public schools aren't perfect, though, everybody, because they don't have religion. And he would say, what we couldn't say today, but he could back then, he said, we would all admit that your education is deficient if it doesn't take faith into account. So he simply left it by saying, we got to find a way to introduce religious instruction in our public schools. Now, John Ireland doesn't just whistle Dixie. He decided he was going to do something and was going to have an experiment here in the Archdiocese of St. Paul. When did it become the Archdiocese of Minneapolis-St. Paul? What year? That's just within the last 30 years or so, wasn't it? 50, was it? Okay. Anyway, John Ireland said, have you ever heard of Faribault or Stillwater? Where are they? Are they close? Okay, apparently there's two towns near here called Faribault and Stillwater. They had two Catholic schools that were doing well, and John Ireland went to the public school board in Faribault and the public school board in Stillwater, and he said, you take over our Catholic schools. You let the nuns still teach, but they will be public schools. There will be no religion during the day. You pay for them. Well, the public schools said, yippee, because they were heavily Catholic towns. So he gave the Catholic schools to the public schools. They paid for them, and he said, but we will have Mass before the day begins, and we will have a half hour of religious instruction at the end of the day. And that's the answer. That would be a traditional Americanist approach. Let's save the essentials, okay? We have religious instruction, but let's accommodate into American culture. It set off an explosion that you cannot believe. It's called the Faribault-Stillwater plan. It still would be, if you study American Catholic history, you're going to spend quite a bit of time on it. The conservatives were furious at Iron John. They said, you've just capitulated to the public schools. This is going to lead to the mass destruction of our beloved Catholic schools. Not only that, you've given the right to educate our kids to the state, and we as Catholics believe it belongs to the parents. John Ireland knew he had caused an uproar, and he knew it was extraordinarily controversial. So what did he do? I would love to have his frequent flyers. He went to Rome, okay? As you get the impression, he was in Rome a lot, okay? He went to Rome to defend himself, and again, he won. The Holy See issued a document calling Tolerare Potest, which is simply the Latin for the John Ireland plan, the Faribault-Stillwater plan can be tolerated, okay? It wasn't like it was blessed, but it's not immoral. It can be tolerated. So the Americanizers won only for a minute. That became the turning point of the Americanists becoming on the run, okay, and the conservative ascendancy, which would reach a crescendo in 1900 when Pope Leo XIII would issue an encyclical called Testem Benevolentiae, condemning what he called Americanism, all right? Before we wrap up with that, the controversy was so severe, everybody, that Pope Leo said, I better send a delegate to the United States to calm things down. Now, this had been a rumor for a while. You know what an apostolic delegate is. Most countries of the world, the Holy Father, the Holy See, would send a delegate as his personal representative to the church. I shouldn't say that. In most countries of the world, the Holy See would send a nuncio as his ambassador to the church and to the government. We didn't have one of those until Ronald Reagan appointed one in 1884. We did have a delegate, but the Americanizers didn't want him. The Americanizers didn't want him. Because why? Remember I told you their characteristics? Rome, butt out. We can take care of our own. This American culture thinks that the Pope's telling us what color socks to put on the morning as it is. We don't need some delegate over here. It's going to explode in our faces. Stay home. In fact, John Ireland and James Gibbons had a circular letter writing to Pope Leo saying, we hear you might send a delegate. Please don't do it. It would be a disaster. Before that got there, Pope Leo announced that he was accepting an invitation from the American government to send a delegate to the Columbian exhibition in Chicago in 1893 because the President of the United States had asked for the original maps that Columbus had used, and guess who had them? The Vatican. So Pope Leo said, oh my gosh, the government of the United States, by the way, Rome wanted a delegate here for a long time. The Pope Leo said, oh my gosh, the President of the United States is asking me to send a delegate to bring the maps to the Columbian exhibition, and he immediately accepted, okay? Now this is interesting. Here he'll show you how shrewd John Ireland was. You ever heard this story? So the man he sent was a man named Francesco Satoli. It wasn't going to be Bernie Clancy, okay? It was Francesco Satoli from Italy. And he is on his way over with the precious maps. And the rumor is, of course, that he ain't going to go back home, that he's going to stick around. So guess what happens? John Ireland knew the boat he was coming over on, and he said, I'm going to go to New York and meet him. Now, he didn't want him to come. But he said, odds are we're going to be stuck with this guy. He goes to New York. His nemesis, Michael Corrigan, the Archbishop of New York, has a huge reception ready on the docks of New York to greet Archbishop Satoli being sent by Pope Leo at the invitation of the American government with bands and red carpets and waiting for the boat to dock. Ireland rents a smaller boat to take him out to the boat, to board the boat, to meet Archbishop Satoli, and to say, Your Excellency, we are thrilled you are here. You don't need to go through all the turmoil of New York. Get in the boat, and I will take you to the shore, and we have a railroad car ready to take you to Chicago. So John Ireland whisks and of course the new delegate are the new French. John Ireland spoke French. They were buddies. He got in the boat. The maps go in the boat. They get on the car. And poor Corrigan is waiting about 3 days for the boat to arrive. And when it came in, there was no delegate. Now that shows you how shrewd he was, all right? So anyway, it turns out that Leo was shrewd and said, well, Satoli's there anyway. I'm appointing him as my first apostolic delegate to the United States. What's John Ireland going to do? John Ireland and James Gibbons wire the rector of the North American College and say, in a couple days, you're getting a letter from us telling Pope Leo, please don't send a a delegate. We're sending it to you so that you can bring it personally to them, throw it in the fireplace, and instead give them this cable which says, Holy Father, we've been longing for the appointment of a delegate. Thanks be to God you sent this magnificent man who has captured the hearts of Catholics and non-Catholics in the United States. Thank you, Holy Father. More than ever, Rome and the Catholics in the United States are in each other's Valentine's card list, okay? So I say that to show that there was a lot of human drama there. I'm going to wrap up, folks, but what I'm hoping in those examples I gave you would show you a style, an attitude, a strategy that characterized the conservatives and the liberals of the day, and some of the issues that I would say to you are still with us. About 3 years ago, get this, about 3 years ago, a wonderful group of young, prominent Catholic educators came to see me. And they said, we would like your permission to open up a charter school here. Now, you know what? Do you have charter schools here? Charter schools are public schools, but run by a charter, all right? You can't teach religion in a charter school. But this group came to me and said, we would like to rent one of your empty Catholic school buildings that you've had sadly to close. We will get a charter. We will rent that from the parish. We will run a charter school, and we'll have Mass in the morning at 7:30, and we will have religious instruction in after-school care. Isn't that daring, they said to me. Isn't that innovative? Isn't that creative? Well, I so appreciated their endeavor that I wasn't about to bust their bubble to say, well, actually, John Ireland thought of that in 1890 and had proposed it in the Faribault Stillwater plan. But I say that to you to see how some of the challenges and tensions are still with us. And my brothers and sisters, what it boils down to is the relationship between the church and culture. Now, I think it's clear to you that we need both sides. Jesus tells us in the church that we're to be salt to the earth and light to the world. That means we have to be in the world while not of it. So we have to be part of culture, you bet, to be a leaven, a yeast. But he also warns, but if salt loses its flavor, it's no good. In other words, keep what is essential to the identity of salt. So you need both of them. You need a preservation of identity, Catholic vision, identity, values, not watering down the essentials of the faith, with a strategy of cooperation and bridge building to the culture. John Ireland would stand out to this day as the most ardent articulator of that meshing of church and culture. Make peace with culture, be an ally in causes in American society that we can support, and stress the compatibility of the church and culture. He'd be proud of this university that he founded, because I think that model is alive here. You've got rigorous scholarship, you've got a diverse student body where people of all faiths or none at all are accepted. You've got a good standing in the community. He would love that. You form leaders that take their place among some of the most prestigious levels of society and culture, and yet you have a very confident Catholic life where values are instilled, where the faith is presented, where the sacraments are celebrated, where apostolic experiences are encouraged, all right? So he'd say, there's a good example. Now, we need them both. Sometimes we're too strong on one side, sometimes there's too strong on the other. John Ireland was certainly too strong on the Americanizing side. Michael Corrigan was too strong on the conservative side. We need to blend together. And to do that, my friends, takes an immense amount of prudence and circumspection. And I would maintain can only be done with the grace of the Holy Spirit. I'm going to wrap up with this. About a year ago, Imam Tahir, who is the imam at the Albanian Islamic Center on Staten Island, asked if I would come out and spend a day with him. And I find, so on Staten Island is this teeming Islamic Albanian population. And he has what could only be described as a Catholic parish. He's got a grade school, he's got a high school, he's got a gym where kids were playing basketball, he's got lunch for the old people, he's got the ladies quilting, he's got services going on in the mosque. And he says to me, would you help me? He said, I have all the Albanian Muslims coming. We're trying to teach them English. We're trying to get them jobs. We're trying to help them learn how to dress and be respected and accepted here in America, but we don't want to lose our values and our identity. He said to me, it seems to me that you Catholics have learned how to do this. We haven't. Could you help me, give me good examples of how you Catholics have managed to maintain your values and identity while still becoming highly respected in culture? I said to him, thanks for thinking that we have. I don't know if we have. That debate's still going on. And something tells me, Imam, who's a good friend of mine and has since become one, it's going to be going on in your community for decades to come. That debate, everybody, was very common in our faith in the 1880s and 1890s. And there was never more an aggressive, innovative guy to try to settle that tension than John Ireland. And I appreciate the chance to talk about him. Thanks. Did I go on too long? Are we all right? Don't forget Marvin O'Connor's, he's an alumnus of this university. He was a professor of history at Notre Dame University, the best biography of John Ireland. And Scott Appleby, who wrote a book called Church and Age Unite, which would be a history of the Americanist movement. So I just hope that I whet your appetite and that you'll be eager to learn more of the consecrated blizzard of the Northwest. Thanks a lot. How are we? Larry, what do we got?
It's about 20 to 9.
You wanted, sure.
Do you have time for questions?
Sure, I think we got 10, 15 minutes or so. Any questions, or you got any?
Where's our collection?
Good, a collection?
Card.
Oh, that, yeah. That's one assimilation.
Where's our? If you have a question, the first one I got is, were you speaking from your head or your heart when you talked about the Yankees versus the Twins? Sorry, I was just jotting
Both.
down. So what is it about America that was so attractive to Ireland?
To John Ireland? Yeah. It's freedom, it's democracy, and folks, it's separation of church and state. You have to remember, John Ireland came from a country, Ireland, where church and state were united, and not in the Catholic Church, in the Church of England, all right? And the Irish people were oppressed by that. And in fact, there would be some that believed that that was part of the reason for the famine, all right? English oppression. I'm not going into that. You can study that in your own history courses, whether or not there's accuracy there or not. But so when he would come to the United States, where there was freedom of religion, and where the government did not favor any one religion, a lot of people in Europe were scandalized by that because they thought, like Italy, they thought, well, we couldn't have a united culture where these other strange religions were able to exist. France, Spain, Italy, we have to have unity of church and state. We can't allow freedom of church and religious freedom and separation of church and state. Ireland and the Irish in general found it to be refreshing and liberating and good for the church. The conservatives, especially the Germans who fled what was called the Kulturkampf, which was the Protestant endeavor to suppress the Catholic culture of Bavaria, where again faith and government were united, weren't in favor of that, even though they would grow to appreciate religious freedom because it became clear to the Catholics, well, if we have union of church and state here, it sure ain't going to be Catholicism, all right? So it was that really, and when he saw that young men were willing to die for that union and that republic and those ideals, in the Civil War, he thought, this is exhilarating. And this is somewhat of a promised land. He would be with Orestes Brownson and with Isaac Hecker, the founder of the Paulists, who would say, not only is America tolerant of the Catholic Church, America is ripe for conversion. And America and Catholicism have an extraordinarily benign bond. The conservatives will say, are you nuts? They don't like us, they never will, and it's more of a secular pagan society than a religious one. But the Americanizers, America was good for the church.
What did you say to the charter school in New York?
I said, come on in, we need you, and it's flourishing. Isn't it a beautiful idea? I don't know, do you have it here, Archbishop Hebda? Do you have any of them? These are the Brilla Academies. You may have heard of Seton Academies. Now they have 2 in New York, and here's even better. So when I visit the Brilla Academy, now technically they can't teach the faith during the day. All the teachers whom they hire are young, fervent, committed Catholics. Now they can't pray with their kids. They can't teach the faith overtly. But the day I'm there, I'm in 4th grade. And I said, oh, Mrs. Kelsey, what are you teaching today? And she said, oh, Your Eminence, we're having a day on the history of New York City, and we're talking about heroes of New York. Children, would you stand up and tell them who you are? So one of the boys stood up and said, yes, Cardinal Dolan, I am a hero of New York named John Neumann. And I came from Bohemia, and I was ordained a priest, and a saint. Little Molly says, I'm a New York hero. My name is Elizabeth Ann Seton. Little Karen Stump said, I'm a hero of New York. My name is Dorothy Day. But they're all Catholics. And the teacher's there winking at me, see? She says, well, we can't overtly teach. I go to another one that's for the Latino kids. It's near December 12th. You think you were in Mexico City. They're not teaching the faith, they're teaching Mexican culture, which is inseparable from Our Lady of Guadalupe, okay? So, but it's the pre and post, because they only do it in poor neighborhoods, see, where the parents have to have pre and post care for their kids. If the school doesn't have it, they have to bring them to the Y or to pay for child care. So the charter schools have pre and post and say, by the way, folks, during pre and post, no coercion here, but if you want your kids to get into catechism class and to go to mass and to learn songs and to learn their prayers and to learn devotions, we'll do it, and 95% of them do, okay? Last year, 22 of the parents entered the faith. They were Catholics kind of, but had lapsed. I think this is a good idea. The conservatives, and I'm usually considered a conservative, but the conservatives are leery of it, Archbishop Hebda. Like my superintendent of schools says, oh, Your Eminence, we better be careful. If this thing, he says, this charter school is going to work, it's free. There's a Catholic grade school 6 blocks away. Those parents are going to start sending their kids there, and we're going to lose that Catholic school. He's got a point. That'd be the conservative view. We can't dilute our own. We don't want to lose what we got. See? The debate, the tension still goes on.
Your Eminence, it is an honor for you to be on our campus, and we so appreciate your enlightening us about John Ireland. And shall we show Cardinal Dolan how grateful we are?
You be proud. You be proud of the great founder that you have, John Ireland. All right? He was, thank you. He was far from a saint, and he was far from perfect, but we're better off for having him, I think, in the long run. And I applaud you all for carrying on what was best. He had some bad, too, but what's best seems to be pretty alive on this campus and in this great archdiocese that he'd be proud of. So, you want to go out for a beer or what? He'd have a fit. What? The Lord be with you. Through the intercession of Mary, our mother, and St. Thomas Aquinas, may Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Praise be Jesus Christ, now and forever. Thank you all.